Hello, and welcome to the second video in the Professor of Cocktail Studies series. I'm Mark Grimsley. I'm a professor at The Ohio State University, but I'm also the professor of cocktail studies. And what I was originally going to give you for this week is something very different from what has turned out to be the case. I'm going to load up a PowerPoint presentation for you. So take a second to get that done. Okay. I use PowerPoint all the time, and this format in teaching my courses online, and in many ways it's a convenient way to handle things, but it does have its clunkiness, as you've just witnessed. But in any event, what you're looking at is my dining room table, all set up to do an initial presentation called Cocktail Making 101, an introduction to it. But as I was trying to film it, I discovered that I could not do it without the help of my daughter, Chloe, shown here with an antique telephone that we recently purchased because when we saw it, we just had to have it. So anyway, Chloe's off with her mother on vacation. And so I had to go in a different direction. Chloe's really into this thing, by the way. This is something that she put together. I came up with a mnemonic to remember the 6 kinds of spirits, which is to say high test alcohol, 40 proof or above. So vodka, gin, tequila, rum, whiskey, brandy. You can remember that by Victor Goes to Rome with Brandy. We'll talk about that more next week. It is useful to know what the 6 spirits are. So she's really into this, and she's also got a list of future videos and some recipes that she wants to look at, but I'm not going to show you those. I don't want to spoil the excitement. By the way, what's behind me is the high watermark of Pickett's Charge, the Battle of Gettysburg. It is a photograph taken some years ago when I was doing a staff ride of the Gettysburg battlefield. And a staff ride is a combination of historical tour and opportunity to discuss issues of command and control, strategic vision, other kinds of decision making, face of battle issues, medical care, anything that that military officers want to discuss. It was a practice that originated in the early 20th century, and that's where and they used to ride, literally, they used to ride horses. Officers ride horses on these battlefields, and therefore it became known as the staff ride. The staff rides became moribund until a professor at Allegheny College for many years, Dr. J. Luvas, revived them during his time at the Army War College, I want to say in the circa 1970 or so. And staff rides have been a standard ever since. At the Army War College and other places, there are even staff rides that are designed for business executives. I've seen those. In fact, I participated with those. It's a very versatile instrument. And tomorrow, actually today, because it's after midnight, I'll be meeting with one of my graduate advisees who is also an Army captain, and his next assignment is going to be to teach at West Point, where he'll be responsible for leading staff rides. So I'll be going on a staff ride with him to teach him how to run staff rides. With him will be another graduate student from our program, and a friend of mine from my 2 years as a visiting professor at the Army War College between the years 2008 and 2010. And he and I have stayed in touch ever since. And I'm looking forward to seeing him again, because although we've been in touch by email and Facebook Messenger and this kind of a thing, it's been years since I've seen him in person. Here, by the way, is what I looked like about 10 years ago, actually conducting a staff ride on the Gettysburg battlefield. And I'm in a good mood, because I'm always in a good mood when I run staff rides. They're very enjoyable for me and relaxing, and a good form of exercise, because you do a lot of walking around. So it's going to be a real pleasure to link up with everybody for the tomorrow's staff ride, or today's staff ride, which will continue tomorrow, because Gettysburg is a complicated battle and it takes 2 days to go through it. But realizing that I was going to be going on the staff ride made me think about cocktails in the context of the Civil War, or if you like, alcohol usage in the context of the Civil War. And there is a fascinating book that is about to come out. I've read it as a doctoral dissertation. It's by Megan Bever. It's called At War with Alcohol, King Alcohol, Debating Drinking and Masculinity in the Civil War. And I'm going to pull for you and read to you just a little bit from the first chapter of the dissertation. She talks about the temperance movement that was underway, that would ultimately lead to prohibition in the United States. And the temperance movement was making some headway at that particular time. The state of Maine had gone dry, had instituted prohibition there. A number of other states had either gone dry or were attempting to, and being thwarted by constitutional problems with the state constitution's restrictions that didn't allow them to take that particular step. But it was making a real headway. And the Civil War really bothered people who were engaged in temperance, because they felt that it was about to lead to a gigantic backward step in the progress that they had made, because the fear was that these soldiers, once they got into the two military camps, would be overwhelmed by the temptations of those camps, and that in an effort to assert their manliness, to appeal to sociability, to honor and bravery, these young men might well drink to their ruin. So that is a sentence from the dissertation, now the book. And she also adds that the Journal of the American Temperance Union stressed that the young men living together away from their homes while being subjected to great excitements, to say the least, would be, quote, in constant danger of being drawn into habits of drunkenness from which they will never escape. And so there was an effort made at the beginning of the war to get the units that were forming to go off and fight, to take the temperance pledge. And these were called, members of the Cold Water Brigade. And you might think, well, these temperance people, they were just a bunch of prudes, but no. They were dealing with a very serious problem in American life. The problem was this: the scale on which Americans of drinking age were drinking. In 1830, the per capita consumption of ethanol, of pure alcohol, if you took all of the whiskey, the brandy, the beer, everything that men and the women who drank, you took all of it together, it would come to 5 gallons of pure alcohol each year. If you're familiar with Everclear, it's a grain alcohol. I'm going to show it to people in a future presentation, and I bought it specifically for that purpose. I had to sign for it and everything in person, that I was over 21 and this kind of thing. It was almost like, like it was a time bomb or something. But the Everclear is 195 proof, which means it's almost pure alcohol. And if these people were drinking 5 gallons of alcohol, the equivalent of that every year, they were drinking about 5 times 4, 20 bottles, because of 1 liter bottle, 20 bottles of Everclear every single year. And this did more than just make them drunk on their ass. It made them abusive. And a major problem, this is why so many women were the driving force behind the temperance movement, was that their husbands would go off to saloons. When they got their pay, they would spend away their pay, which meant that it was going to be difficult to feed their children. And then when they came home and their wives said boo to them, they often got physical. And this engraving does not exaggerate what happened. This is a very serious thing. And I don't like it when people just dismiss people who are pro-prohibition as just prudes and saying, you cannot legislate morality and so forth. Of course you can. We do it all the time. And these pro-temperance people believed, I think correctly, that they were coping with a major societal problem. Now, banning alcohol may not have been the solution, but nevertheless, they were confronting something that was deeply problematic in American life. And in the course of trying to persuade um, Americans to abandon alcohol drinking, there was this kind of a engraving, almost a cartoon, called "The Drunkard's Progress." This appears in a lot of American history textbooks. And so, if you look over there at the left, you see this man taking a glass with a friend. You know, how harmful could that be? A glass with a friend. And then as it goes up, you see that he's drinking more and more. And then at the apex, the high point of his life, step 5, the summit attained, jolly companions, a confirmed alcohol or a confirmed drunkard. Okay? But he's having a great time. And so far, his life, the wheels of his life are not coming off. But then step 6, oh, poverty and disease. Step 7, forsaken by friends. Step 8, desperation and crime. And then finally, step 9, death by suicide. Okay? So, a little, maybe a little hokey to modern sensibilities, but it was an attempt to really dramatize what could happen to people, what often did happen to men who started drinking. They went down the road to ruin. And if you look at the bottom, there is a wife and mother and child lamenting the death of her husband and of the child's father. The temperance movement, the idea that alcohol was bad, also applied to opposition to immigrants coming into the country at that particular time. There was a nativist movement similar to the one we have today. This one directed against the Irish and the Germans. And you can see that they're carrying off the ballot box, which means that they're voting illegally. But at the same time, look at what they're wearing. And the Irishman is wearing a barrel of Irish whiskey, and the German is wearing a barrel of lager beer. And so the onus of drinking too much and damaging society through drinking too much is being applied to this nativist movement, nativist sentiment. Okay. Well, the temperance people were correct in thinking that there was going to be a disaster of soldiers beginning to drink too much when the war broke out. This photograph shows 2 soldiers posing with a bottle of whiskey and glasses and playing cards. And by the way, playing cards were kind of a bad thing back then as well. They were considered sinful. And a lot of times soldiers, when they went into battle, would discard their playing cards in case they got killed, because they got killed with playing cards, they might go to hell or something. So at the same time, from the standpoint of a temperance person, this would be, oh my God, this is just what we were afraid of. And indeed, the army itself issued rations of whiskey to soldiers. This is an engraving made at Petersburg, Virginia. There was a long siege at Petersburg, Virginia, 10 months that began in June of 1864 and carried through to April of 1865, which meant that it went through the winter of 1864, which was exceptionally cold. And so that's probably why they're being given a ration of whiskey. It's to keep out the cold. By the way, off to the left, you can see the winter quarters. These were made by the soldiers themselves to stay in when the army ceased to campaign for a year and then camped out for extended periods. Well, we all know the story about Grant and how Grant was a drunkard. Is that true? We don't know, but we kind of don't think so. He seems to have gone on a bender in 1863 during kind of a lull in the siege of Vicksburg. But otherwise, the evidence we have is not so much evidence as innuendo and whispers and so on. But there were a lot of soldiers who did drink. And there's a famous episode. And of course, this is where the title of this presentation comes from. During the Battle of Antietam, in which, well, I'll just show you. I like to go to the original source. So this is a National Park Service marker, and you can read about this story in various secondary books, various books that have been published on the Battle of Antietam. But although, sorry, the story is going to come up a little bit later. Let me show you the problem that the Union Army faced on the southern part of the battlefield at Antietam. There was a bridge that crossed Antietam Creek, and then above the bridge you can see a high ridge, and there were Confederate troops atop that ridge, of course, and they had a commanding view of the bridge. They're looking down at it. There's only about 500 of them, but nevertheless, that's a narrow bridge, and they can shoot a lot of people going along that bridge. And people who have gone to Antietam have often said, well, why didn't they just wade the creek? Well, I'm going to explain in a moment why they didn't just wade the creek. But take a look at what they tried to do in the course of trying to capture that bridge. I've been to Antietam a number of times, and just to the east of the bridge, there is a ridge line so that the Union troops behind the ridge could not see the bridge. And so the first attack misses the bridge altogether and winds up at the creek to the north and gets pinned down. The second attack is like, well, let's make sure we get a hold of that bridge. So let's go up the road leading to that bridge. And good idea, except it means that the flank, the left side of the attacking force, is getting enfilade fire from those Confederate troops at the top, and so they're decimated and they fall back. That leads to the third and final attack that I'm going to be discussing in a moment. What happens? Well, before we go on, excuse me, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. For a long time, people have said, well, why go for the bridge? I mean, look down at that Antietam. It's not over anybody's head. Why didn't I just wade the creek? And any number of people have in print have criticized the decision. And when I have gone to staff rides, one of my first staff rides in 1990, there was a Marine officer who was with me, and he was looking down at this, and I could not persuade him that maybe it wasn't such a good idea to wade that creek. He was just impervious to my explanations. Well, in 1994, I went on another staff ride, this time with West Point plebes, the equivalent of freshmen. And they were led, the staff ride was being led by a friend of mine named Bill Odom. And what Bill did, without telling anybody, was he got the cadets standing at the eastern bank of Antietam Creek. And he also had a stick that he waved like a sword. And he talked about, what kind of leadership would it require to get those troops across the bridge, across Antietam Creek? Bold, determined leadership. They all came back. And what kind of soldiers would have to follow that leader? Bold, determined soldiers. And then he goes forward. And this is November. Okay, this is November, and he goes into the creek, and it's a drop. It's a drop of about 5 or 6 feet to get into the creek itself. And then the cadets all went, and they got into line of battle. They did this automatically. And what they discovered was they couldn't maintain this line of battle. Some people would forge ahead faster than others. And then the real disaster occurred when they got to the other side. Now, back in 2012, I was conducting yet another staff ride, and another historian who was conducting the staff ride with me sort of challenged me to wade Antietam Creek. And maybe the audience thought that this was a challenge to do something that I had never done, but by 2012, I'd done it a number of times. C-SPAN was there, And this clip can be found on YouTube. I'm going to play it for you now. People want to see Mark. Yeah. You notice how difficult it is to get out on the other bank? Okay. Yeah, we gotta get past this. Okay, look, I like to go to the original source on things when I can. And the original source for the story about, will you give us our whiskey, which I'm about to tell you, comes in the history of the 51st Regiment of Pennsylvania volunteers, and then what's called veteran volunteers. They re-enlisted enough in 1864 to earn the title of veteran volunteer unit. It was written by a captain in the regiment, Thomas Parker. And he tells the story of what happens when the 51st Pennsylvania and the 51st New York, both of Colonel Edward Ferrero's brigade, are asked to storm the Burnside's bridge. And I'm going to read some of it too. Listen to this. Attention, 2nd Brigade. Quick as a flash, the brigade was in line. Ferrero then rode up in front of the colors of the 51st Pennsylvania Volunteers and spoke to the men as follows. It is General Burnside's special request, and General Burnside is the commander of the 9th Corps, everybody in that particular sector. It is General Burnside's special request that the 251st, Pennsylvania, New York, take that bridge. Will you do it? The request was unlooked for, and the men had not had time to think of it when Corporal Lewis Patterson of Company I, although a temperate man, exclaimed, "Will you give us our whiskey, Colonel, if we take it?" Because Ferrero had taken away their ration earlier for some kind of minor infraction. Colonel Ferrero turned suddenly around to the corporal and replied, "Yes, by God, you shall all have as much as you want if you take the bridge." Then he turns around and says, "I don't mean the whole brigade, but you 2 regiments shall have just as much as you want if it is in the commissary, or I have to send to New York to get it and pay for it out of my own private purse. That is, if I live to see you through it. Will you take it?" A unanimous yes went up that told of the determination of the men to take the bridge. And this is not an anticipation of the whiskey, but to let General Burnside know that his confidence in the twin regiments was not misplaced, nor should be abused. And then they stormed Burnside's bridge. They just went straight across, defying the fire of the Confederates above them on the ridge. And they got to the other side. And once they got to the other side, that made it possible for the rest of the Union 9th Corps, everybody that Burnside commanded, to also cross onto the western bank of Antietam and get ready to advance further. And they would ultimately reach close to the town of Sharpsburg. And if they'd gotten to Sharpsburg, General Lee's army, which was along the kind of a ridge line running north to south in that area, Lee's army would have been destroyed. The Union army heavily outnumbered Lee's army at that particular point, and so it was really touch and go for the Confederates once the Federals got across that bridge. And the episode is so famous that the well-known artist Don Stivers, who has done a number of prints, mostly military prints on all kinds of subjects. He's been working for years. If you look in the comments below, you're going to see that I've left a link to his website. You can go see that. And so he's done a print, and it's really, a nice looking print. And the title is indeed, "Will You Give Us Our Whiskey Now?" So And this would have been like a nightmare scenario for the temperance people, because not only are these people, are these soldiers drinking whiskey, but drinking whiskey has been glamorized. It's an act it's an act associated with great courage. It's an act associated with great manliness and masculinity. So this this engraving comes out in 1874. And what's interesting to me is how symbolically, it replicates something, rather like the charge of the 51st Pennsylvania and 51st New York. This time, the adversary is demon beer, demon whiskey, demon gin, demon rum, demon brandy, and then wine and liquors. And and look at this, look at that at the bottom. It says woman's holy war. Again, women are very much involved in this temperance movement. They're the driving force behind it. And then you have this idealized woman on a horse with a shield and a really badass axe from medieval times. She ain't playing. And then other women coming in behind to smash these various liquors that are doing so much harm to the country. And yet, in the same year that the Battle of Antietam occurred, 1862, in the same year when this famous episode, the charge of the 51st Pennsylvania and 51st New York, the "Will You Give Us Our Whiskey" episode, the same year as that, a book gets published in New York. It's called How to Mix Drinks, or The Bon Vivant's Companion. And it's by a bartender, a former principal bartender at the Metropolitan Hotel in New York. Okay. His name is Jerry Thomas. And here is Jerry Thomas in full action. Okay. Jerry Thomas is a fascinating person. I'll be talking about Jerry Thomas in a future video, but just briefly. He was a bartender at several establishments, and he was is really considered to be the first bartender or mixologist to approach cocktail making creatively. And this How to Mix Drinks book, under a slightly different title, is in print today. In fact, I've got a copy of it, which I'll share with you at a future point. And if you want to know what he's doing in that engraving, he is performing his signature flair cocktail. It's called the Blue Blazer. And what he does is he sets whiskey on fire, and then he's got the blazing liquid. He has a mixing tin here and a mixing tin there, and he's throwing the whiskey, from one mixing tin to the other. I mean, Tom Cruise in Cocktail, eat your heart out. Juggling bottles and so forth is one thing, but this is hardcore. So, that's all I got for this time. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have enjoyed it, what I want you to do, and you hear this request all the time, is to like and subscribe. Now, before I go, I want to explain to you what like and subscribe means. It doesn't mean that if you like and subscribe, I'm going to get money. I would have to have hundreds of thousands of views of any of my videos and so forth before YouTube would take an interest in monetizing this particular channel. I don't care about that. What I care about is this. Throughout my life, I've been interested in writing for the general public. I published my first article when I was 20 years old for a magazine of popular history called Civil War Times Illustrated. I've continued to publish in magazines of what's so-called popular history for 4 decades now. And because I think the professors, by and large, we publish, we write, and we talk for each other, for other specialists. And that's fine. That advances knowledge, and don't have anything against that. But I think we neglect our responsibility to take what we know and share it with the general public. And instead, what we do is we kind of leave that responsibility up to journalists who act as intermediaries. So you have us academics, and we're just talking to each other, and then the journalist talks to us, then the journalist turns around and talks to the general reader, you know, and does it for us because we're not doing it ourselves. Now, what will happen if you like this video is the YouTube algorithm will begin to interpret it as, oh, people are interested in this particular video. And the algorithm will know basically what this video is about, that it's about the Civil War and this famous episode in the Civil War. And it knows people who are interested in YouTube videos about the Civil War. And it will begin to suggest this video to them. And I think they'll enjoy it too. And so you will help provide the opportunity for others who may be interested in the Will You Give Us Our Whiskey episode to have a chance to see and enjoy this video, because, you know, I had fun doing it, and I hope you had fun watching it. So until next time, this is the professor of cocktail studies signing off, and here's Mud in Your Eye.